Om Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunandi Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapadakramopanisadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. We are coming to the end of the commentary, the Bhashya, on the 21st sloka of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Shankara Bhashyam. So Bhashyakara concludes his refutation of the Purvamimamsaka's view that rituals or sakama karmas should continue as long as we live. That is the Purvamimamsaka's view, the Purvapaksha. So Bhashyakara tried to defend the Advaitic view that for Jnani, his adhikara is in renunciation. For Atmajnani, he is fit for sannyasa, renunciation of the Vedic rituals, Srauda, Smarta rituals. For Ajnani, or for those who are not spiritually evolved enough to transcend rituals, for those who are yet to evolve, they are fit, their adhikara is in karma or rituals. So, those who are not spiritually evolved enough to transcend ritualism, those who are still progressing towards that goal, they should continue their practices of Srauda, Smarta rituals, Vedic rituals. So, in the process, towards the end of the commentary, the Purvamimamsakas, the Purvapakshins, tried to twist the Anvaya Krama or the prose order of this particular important verse. Sarva karmani manasa sannisyaste sukham vasi navadware pure dehi naiva kurvanna karye. So the normal Anvaya is Sarva karmani manasa sannyasya navadware pure aste. This is the Advaitin's Anvaya Krama, prose order. But Purvapakshin says, Mimamsaka says, Sarva karmani manasa navadware pure dehe sannyasya. This is the distorted Anvaya or prose order put forward by the Purvamimamsakas. So, to conclude this Bhashya, we have to keep a few things in mind. Purvapakshin says that this asdhatu should be given nikshepartha in the sense that it should be interpreted as meaning preservation or dedication of all karmas. That is, it should be dedicated to the body, we should continue these karmas. But Siddhantin says it is not so. The meaning is not nikshepartha, the meaning is tyagartha. Sannyasa, sam and ni, two upasargas plus asudhatu, nyam pratyaya, tyagartha or nyasa. This is the Anvaya Krama put forward by Advaitins. Purvapakshins on the other hand says asudhatu bhuvi asti, means kshepanartha. So, towards the end of the commentary, Bhashyakara says, Na sarvatra atmanaha avikriya vadharanat asana kriyayaha cha adhikarana apekshatvat tat anapekshatvat cha sannyasasya. So, when you are talking about nikshepartha. As you have to give an adhikarana for the kriya aste. So, for that, you need an adhikarana. On the other hand, if you interpret sannyasa in tyagartha, there is no adhikarana. So, from these two standpoints, Advaitin's view is correct and Purvapakshi's views cannot be accepted. Because when you use the word sannyasa as kshepanartha, it doesn't become meaningful without an adhikarana. So that particular point is made. So asana kriyaya cha adhikarana apekshatvat. If the interpretation is given as asana, means aste, then you should state where you are sitting. Because you cannot just say sitting, you should indicate the adhikarana, exactly where you are sitting. But if you interpret asadhatu as tyagartha, then there is no need of an adhikarana. Tat anapekshatva cha sannyasasya. Sampurvastu nyasa shabda iha tyagartho na nikshepartha. Because the word aste, as interpreted by Purvapakshins, need an adhikarana, and on the other hand, sannyasa, as interpreted by Advaitins or Siddhanta Paksha, Siddhantins, there is no need of an adhikarana. Therefore, here tyagartha is more logical and acceptable than kshepanartha. So Bhashya continues, Tasmat Gita Shastre Atmajnanavataha Sanyaseva Adhikaraha Na Karmani. Therefore, the central point is, in the whole range of Gita, it is very clearly stated that those who have got knowledge, he is fit only for renunciation. He transcends rituals, he transcends karmas, he transcends sakama karmas. So we should always remember the word karma here means the srauda smarta karmas prescribed in the srauda smarta literature, which more or less are included in the 40 samskaras, which more specifically in the context of Vedic culture denotes Sapta Havir Yajnas and Sapta Soma Yajnas, which includes all kinds of Yajna, Vajapeya, Agnishtoma and so on. And these karmas are normally performed only by householders, and the purpose, the goal of these ritualistic karmas is prosperity, progeny, reputation, wealth, and so on. And those who are highly evolved in spiritual life, who don't care for any kind of material prosperity, need not perform any of these rituals, so they are fit for sannyasa. So, Tasmat Gita Shastre Atmajnanavataha Sannyase eva adhikaraha. Therefore, in the whole context of Gita, as a shastra, as a moksha shastra, those who have knowledge, mean those who are highly evolved, those who are transcended the realm of ritualism, they are fit only for renunciation and not for karma, not for rituals. Now we are going to point out this in the coming section. That's right. Iti tatra tatra upanishad atmajnana prakarane darshishyamaha. We are going to substantiate and elaborate on this point in the coming chapters. So now we are coming towards the end of this particular bhashya, the last sentence. Pragadam tu vakshyamaha tatra atmanaha avinashitvam pradijñātam tad kim iva uchyate. Again, the Bhashyakara is trying to take us back to the original verse, the original sloka, with which we began this discussion. Veda vinashinam nityam ya enam ajam avyayam katham sa purusha partha kam ghatayati kantikam. So this Atma is Avinashi, Nityam. This was the statement that was clearly made in the 21st sloka, which is the beginning of this commentary. So Bhashyakara says, now after long discussion, let us come back to the topic under the present context. What is the topic? Veda vinashanam nityam ya enam ajam avyayam katham sa purusha partha kam ghatayati kantikam. Second chapter, 21st verse. Atma is indestructible. Atma is eternal. Atma is unborn. Atma is savikāratīta. Jayade asti vardhade viparinamade apakshiyade vinashyade. These are the savikara, 6 changes. Atma is beyond these changes. Atman is not subjected to any of these changes. Something is born in time and it exists, it grows, it evolves, it decays and it dies or disappears to be reborn again. So this is the reality about everything in this world at the empirical level. Atman is beyond these 6 changes. So this is subject for discussion. Bhashyakara says, Prakritantu Vakshiyamaha. Now let us come back to the Prakrita Vishaya, the subject and the discussion. Tatra Atmanaha Avinasitvam Pratiknyadam. We already stated that Atman is Avinashi, Atman is indestructible. Now that is going to be elaborated. What is it like? In what way do you repeat this idea again and again that Atman is indestructible? So the next verse. So we have to remember, Karmadhikari is Ajnani, Jnanadhikari is Jnani. Ajnani here should not be misunderstood by superficial English translation. Ajnani is not ignorant in the sense we use the word ignorant in the dictionary. Ajnani here means those who have not yet reached the realization of the fact that they are the all-pervading immanent Atman, or those who are yet evolving, those who have not yet reached a higher level of spiritual evolution, those who are not yet ready to transcend rituals. There is no conflict with rituals, there is transcending. That is an important point to remember. So Ajnani, that is those who are yet evolving, not yet reached their highest level of Chitta Shuddhi, they are fit for karma or rituals. And those who have attained a much higher level of spiritual evolution, they are fit for jnanam. They are not supposed to perform any of these Vedic rituals, any of the karma. That's the idea behind. So, now how are we going to show that Atman is Avinashi? That's being explained. Vasamsi jirnani yatha vikaya navani grihnadi naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyadi navani dihi. The famous verse, which is very important from the standpoint of Hindu or Vedanta philosophy with regard to reincarnation and law of karma. Because Vedanta or Hindu philosophy in general believe in cyclicism, not in straight line progression. The fundamental difference with regard to their ontological views of the absolute reality are all brought out indirectly in the coming bhashyas. So, yatha naraha jirnani vasamsi vihaya aparani navani vasamsi rinnahadi. Just as ordinary human beings, they cast off, they give up all torn clothes, worn out clothes, which are not yet fit for wearing, and they they accept they wear new clothes. Tatha dehi jirnani sharirani vihaya anyani navani samyati. Like that, dehi should be understood in a very important context. Dehi or sharirin or dehi, these words are not used in the sense of the Atman, Paramatman, the eternal, the unborn, that all-pervading reality. It is not in that sense that the word Dehi or Shariri is used. Dehi here means Atman as it reflects through the reflecting medium of our psycho-physical mechanism. So the Pradibimba or Bimba. The real Atman, Sarvadhisthana Atman, is the prototype, the Bimba. And all these Dehis, embodied beings, are like reflections or Pradibimbas. When we see the reflection of sun, the innumerable reflections of the sun in innumerable pots filled with water. Like that, the same Atman reflects on innumerable psychophysical mechanisms. These reflected Pradibimbas are the true sense of the word Dehi. That should be understood very clearly. So, the Bhashyakara makes this point very clear. Now, normally, what happens is, when our body gets old, or when our body becomes unhealthy, there is a tendency for this body to disappear. So a person may cast off these worn out bodies, and we call it death. And just as a person may cast off these worn out clothes or torn clothes, when those clothes are no more fit for wearing, he may buy new clothes. He puts on new clothes which are new. So the embodied beings, dehis, will cast off worn out bodies and it will enter into other new bodies. This entering this new body we call birth. Casting of the old bodies we call death. So the idea is we don't feel sorry when we give up old clothes. But when we think of death, that is casting off these old worn out bodies, we become afraid. So that was Arjuna's case. Arjuna could not understand the true meaning of his own personality. His understanding of his own personality was, he was this body. So in normal circumstances, a person need not be scary about this mysterious reality of death. Just as he is not scary, he is not worried about giving up old worn out clothes. So if a man helps you to change rotten garment for a new better one, actually is a service to you. So in the spiritual context, a body which is used for adharma, which is used as a wrong means, that is for a wrong purpose, then it becomes a rotten garment, and it's better to tear it off, and it's better to have a new body with which we can start a new life. So this is the central point indicated here. So the point is, behind these changing bodies, there is something which is present in that body, psychophysical mechanism, which is actually Atman. So that Atman is not at all affected by this tearing or by the bad condition of this body. So just as a person who wears clothes is not affected if he gives up some torn clothes and wears new clothes, he is not affected. Rather, he gets an opportunity to look better. Like that, when we get a new body, new psychophysical mechanism, it's an opportunity for us to evolve further, making use of that body. So that aspect is to be understood. So what is the true implication of the word Dehi? That should be understood very clearly. As I mentioned, Dehi or the embodied beings can be compared with the mirror images of the sun. If the sun is reflecting above our heads and we have, suppose let's say we have 1000 pots filled with water. So we will have 1000 reflections. These reflections are called pratibimba. So the relationship between the bimba and pratibimba, the real sun and the innumerable reflections on these pots, is the relationship between the real Atman, which doesn't enter any body, which is not conditioned by the psychophysical mechanism, but which appears to be conditioned by the psychophysical mechanism. Just the sun that is reflecting overhead appears to be conditioned by the size of the pot be filled with water in which the sun is reflected. It may appear to be conditioned, but that reflection doesn't have anything at all to do with the real sun. The water, the reflection or the limitations of the reflection do not affect the prototype, the bimba, the real sun. So it is the analysis called bimba pratibimba vada. It's originally it comes in the Brahma Sutra. Shankaracharya himself he mentions this in the Sutra Bhashyam. But later Padmapadacharya, who wrote Panchapadika, and Sarvajna Muni, who wrote later Sarvajnatman, who wrote Panchapadika Vivarana. So they all developed this idea of bimba pratibimba vada. It's called the Vivarana school, Vivarana view. Mostly is based on Padmapada's Panchapadika. According to Padmapada, Brahman is a locus of avidya. So jivas are like pratibimbas, reflections, and Brahman, the Atman, which never undergoes any change, which only appears to reflect on the psychophysical mechanism. That Brahman is bimba pratibimba. This is like a mirror, so that should be understood. So this real Atman, which is Asanga, which is Surupa, it doesn't undergo any birth or death or change or any disavikaras. But just as the real sun, the prototype, the bimba, appears to be conditioned or modified or affected by the size of the pot in which the water is kept, in which the sun is reflected. It appears only an appearance. It is, in fact, the size of the pot or the reflection doesn't affect the sun at all. Similarly, the Dehi is nothing but the reflection, the pratibimba of Atman or Brahman. So that's an important point. Remember, when we read this particular sloka, that is Vasams jirnani yatha vihaya navani grinnadi naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyadi navani dihi. So you find this idea in the Kathopanishad. Yonimanye prapadyante sharirattvaya dehinaga sthanumanye anusamyandi yatha karma yatha sutam. So whatever actions we perform in our life with word, deeds or action or physical body or intellect, whatever may be. All these actions will leave behind a wave which is called a vritti. The vritti becomes a samskara. Samskara becomes a vasana. Vasana leads to some sankalpas, and according to the sankalpa, we continue acting again. So that's called karma, vritti, samskara, vasana, sankalpa, chakra. Is a wheel. And according to these actions, these samskaras and vasanas, we are born again and again. And according to the accumulated tendencies, we continue living in this world, doing different things, and accumulating new samskaras, sometimes good samskaras, sometimes bad samskaras, and this cycle goes on rotating from life to life, death and rebirth. Now, those who understand that the real Atman is beyond all this, that our true nature is the absolute, transcendental, all-pervading, immanent, spiritual reality, and when we realize that truth, we get out of this wheel. Till then, we give up old bodies just as we give up old clothes, and we adopt new bodies which we call birth. But the difference is we become afraid of giving up the old rotten bodies. So Lord Krishna is actually putting forward a very important statement, that is, there is no need to be afraid, to be scared by any of this. Our true nature is that we are Atman. Once we slowly start our spiritual life, first through niskama karma, unselfish action, then prayer, meditation and so on, slowly when we evolve, we reach a point of mental purity, chitta shuddhi. When we reach that stage, not through conviction or belief, but through experience, when we reach that stage, then our vrittis become purified, which in another sense means vrittis completely cease to exist. So chittam becomes pure. It's no more chittam. It becomes one with Atman. At that level, we transcend this rotating cycle of birth, life and rebirth. That is karma, vritti, samskara, vasana, sankalpa and karma. This chakram continues. So this is a central point to be understood when we read this Bhashyam. Okay, so Bhashyagara discusses the point. Vasamsi varnani jirnani durbaladam katani yathaloki vikaya parityajya navani abhinavani gridnadi upadatte naraha purusha aparani anyani tatha taddut eva sharirani vikaya jirnani anyani samyadi sankachadi navani dehi atma purushavat avikrayva ityartha. So these phenomena, this life and death and rebirth, or birth, life, death and rebirth, this continues. So fundamentally there is a difference between the way Vedanta interprets the reality of life and death and the way Abrahamic traditions interprets. In non-Vedantic traditions, life is a single journey. It begins with birth and it ends with death. At the end of the journey, somebody gives a verdict on your actions and you are sent to hell or heaven. Vedanta, on the other hand, tells you, you can build your own destiny. It is the very antithesis of fatalism. Vedanta tells us that by voluntarily giving up wrong actions and wrong thoughts and voluntarily taking up good actions, we can build a better future. So Bhashyakara says, Vasamsi jirnani durbharadam gatani. Just as clothes become weak, unfit to wear, similarly bodies also become unfit when we become too old or too sick. You can't use the body for any creative spiritual purpose. So we normally give up. So, and then Navani Abhinavani Grinnadi Upadate. Then when we were born, it is called accepting, adopting a new body. So, on the one hand, this shows the perishable nature, the transitoriness of our psychophysical mechanism, and it also shows the immortal, eternal nature of the real Atman, of which Dehi, the embodied beings, constitute so many reflections. Now, Bhashyakara takes up the next subject. Kasma avikriya eva iti aha. Now, how is it called that this Atma is avikriya, beyond changes? Sarvikaratida, as we already mentioned. I mean, Sarvikaras are, as I mentioned earlier, Jayade, Asti, Vardhade, Viparinamade, Apakshede, Vineshadi. Everything at the empirical level is subject to changes. Birth is a change from a state of empirical non-existence to a state of empirical existence. Then we start existing, when we grow, when we evolve, and then finally when we reach a point in our life, our bodies start becoming weaker, they start decaying, and finally death. These are 6 changes. So, it was already indicated in the 21st verse that this Atma Veda Vinashinam Nityam. It is Avinashi, it is Nitya. And it also may Avyayam, it is Avikriya. How is it that you try to establish that this Atman is Avikriya? So that's the next verse. Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dehadi Pavakaha, Nachayanam Kledayantiapo, Nasoshayati Marutaha. So this Atman, it cannot be pierced with weapons. You cannot cut it into pieces. And also, you can burn empirical things, but you cannot burn this Atman. So again, and also water cannot make it wet, water cannot drench it, and winds cannot dry it. So, it's an important point. So this is a clear statement of the fact that Atma is avikriya. It doesn't undergo any change. Nainam chindanti shastrani, yenam shastrani na chindanti, yenam pavakaha na dekhati, yenam apaha na kledayanti, marutaha na soshayadi cha. This is this point. This Atman is beyond changes, so weapons cannot pierce it or cut it, and again fire cannot burn it, and water cannot drench it, water cannot make it wet, and also winds cannot dry it. Yenam prakudam dehinam na chindanti shastrani. So, weapons like a sword or a knife or those things can cut empirical things, bhautika entities. And not only that, you cannot disfigure, you cannot cut things which are not composed of parts, which are partless. Those things which are made of different parts, or those things which can be cut into different parts, weapons can be used to cut. Weapons can work upon this entity. But Atman is partless. Atman is not made up of parts. Atman is not composed of parts. So niravayavatvat. Atman is niravayava. It is one single compact entity. na avayava vibhagam kurvandi shastrani asyadini. So weapons like sword, knife, etc. they can cut or they can disfigure. Only Atman were made of different parts or could be divided into different parts. Atman cannot be divided into different parts. It is niravayava. It is beyond anything that is composed of parts. Tatha na enam dekati pavakaka. Pavakaka, fire, cannot burn Atman. So any kind of change can be affected only if you can disfigure it by cutting it, or if you can bring about a change in its structure by burning or by drenching or by making wet. Atman is beyond all this. So the reality, that the real fact that Atman is beyond all changes, Atman is eternal and immortal, Atman cannot be affected by anything, that absolute truth is driven home with the help of a very graphic description that weapons cannot cut Atman the way weapons can cut empirical things, a wood or a tree or anything. And there are things that could be burned. There are things which cannot be cut but could be burned by fire. Atman cannot be burned by fire. And then again, Agniyapi na bhasmikarodi tatha na enam kledayanti apaha apam ki savayavasya vastunaha adribhavakaranena avayava vislesha apadane samarthyam tat na niravayavai atmani sambhavati. Now what about water? If you allow certain things to remain wet, then water can work upon the structure of that particular entity. But that's possible only if water can somehow bring about a change the structure or bring or divide or weaken the interconnecting the link between different parts, if those things are made of parts. Atman is niravayava. It is not made of avayavas, it is not made of parts. It is partless. It is not composed of different parts. It is an entity itself. So water cannot work upon Atman. Tatha na enam kledayanti apaha. Why? So clear. Apam hi savayavasya vastunaha adribhavakaranena avayava visleshapadane samarthyam. Now water has got one efficiency, one property. Water can work upon certain things. If those things are made of different parts, water can weaken the interconnecting link between different parts if things are made of parts. Or water can weaken the structure. But in this case, Atman is niravayava. Therefore, water also cannot work upon Atman. Tatha sneha dravyam sneha shoshanena nashayadi vayu enam swatmanana shoshayadi madhutaka. Not only that, now suppose certain things which are dry by nature or which are maybe which are wet by nature, winds can change, winds can dry things, winds can separate parts, but that also is not possible in this context, because these things which have got snehamsha means something kind of liquid part, which is somewhat in fact the liquid structure is an essential property of certain things. If you subject that entity to wind, the strong wind can dry that particular object, and when that wet wetness, the sneha bhava, or the liquid property of that particular entity is removed, then it loses its original property. So it is as good as destroyed. So winds can also bring about a change in certain things which are made of parts. And these parts are put together by some other liquid-like things. So they should remain in their original property. If you subject those things to strong winds, winds can dry them. So it's as good as they are destroyed. So Bhashyakara says these Atman cannot be affected by even strong wind. Anything that is oily or greasy can be affected by strong winds. So winds cannot dry it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot drench it, it cannot be, and swords or sharp instruments cannot pierce it. So Atman is eternal, immortal, indestructible. So it is avikriya. There cannot be any change in Atman. That idea is put forward here. The next verse, Achedyoyam adahyoyam akledyo ashosya evacha nitya sarvagata sthanahu achaloyam sanatanaha. So again this Atman, it is indestructible nature, is again emphasized. I am achedyaha, adahyaha, akledyaha, ashosyaha. I am nityaha, sarvagataha, sthanahu, achalaha, sanatanascha. So all these ideas are put forward here. Yasmat अन्योन्य नाश हेतुनि भूतानि येनम आत्मानं नाशयितुं न उत्सहन्ते तस्मात् नित्यः. It's mentioned here. Because these mutually destructive elements, as we mentioned earlier, are not capable of destroying this Atman. Therefore, it is eternal. So we already mentioned earlier, all these things, it cannot be cut, it cannot be burned, it cannot be drenched, it cannot be dried. So all these things can mutually destroy, they can affect a change. Atman cannot be affected by any of these things. Therefore, Atma is Nitya. Nityatva sarvagataha, sarvagatatva sthvanuhu, sthanu iva sthiraha ityedat. Nityatva sarvagataha. So, this Atman is eternal. Why does Atman become eternal? Because Atman is everywhere. There is nothing in this world where Atman is not present. So Atman is immanent and also omnipresent. So, and transcendental. So Atman is eternal, Nitya, it is Sarvagatatva, going everywhere, means it is all pervading. And this makes Atman stable. So sthanu iva, sthiraha. So give an example here. And it is stable. So sthiratva achala ayam atma ataka sanatanaha chirantano na karanat kudaschit nispannaha abhinava ityarthaha. So this Atman is the original cause of everything. So that's an important point. Remember, Atman doesn't produce anything, but Atman at the same time is the original cause of everything. Because everything exists in Atman. So this absolute reality, Atman or Brahman, is sometimes perceived by us as the empirical things, just as a piece of rope is wrongly perceived to be a snake. But once we remove from our mind the delusions of the color, of the size, or the biting nature of the snake that we superimpose upon the piece of rope, once we remove these ideas from our mind and bring light, then we perceive the rope as it is. So, this Atman is all pervading and becomes all pervading through becoming immanent. It is everywhere, it is within ourselves, and it is stable, it is unchanging. Na etesham sloganam paunrityam chodaniyam. So here Bhashyakara makes an interesting statement here. Na etesham sloganam paunrityam chodaniyam. Frequently in traditional scriptures, repetition is considered to be a drawback, a defect. But in any discussion or when we discuss a text which expounds these higher transcendental spiritual truths which are not empirically obvious to us, repetition is not only not questionable, repetition is not only not unacceptable, but repetition is necessary for us because we have to approach this truth from different standpoints. It is something which is not intellectually self-evident. So we have to remind our mind and intellect again and again of this truth. So that's why Bhashyakara says, Na etesham sloganam paunarutyam chodaniyam. We should not question, we should not consider this repetition as something unacceptable. It should not be imputed. The reason is that everything regarding the eternal and immutable nature of the self should be explained, remember. So, in a sense, some of the fundamental statements in the Upanishads, in a single sentence, say everything about the immutable, the eternal reality of Atman. But it should be analyzed from different standpoint. Yet ekena eva slokena atmano nityatvam avikriyatvam cha uttam na jayati mriyadeva ityadina. So Bhashyakara is making an interesting point here. Na jayati mriyadeva kadadit nayam bhutva bhavidavana bhuyaha ajo nitya shasudoyam purano na hanyade hanyamani shrire. In this particular sloka, which we discussed earlier, the whole essence of Atman, the whole essence of Advaita, the teaching that Atman is eternal, unchanging, is Nitya, it is Avikriya, it is unborn, all these aspects have already been stated. In fact, they will be repeated again and again. So, in a single sentence, ekena eva slokena atmano nityatvam avikriyatvam cha uttam. It was already mentioned earlier, the Atman is avikriya, nitya, etc. Tatra yadeva atma vishayam kinjit uchyade tata etasma slogartha na dirichyade kinjit shabdadaha punaruktam kinjit arthadaha iti. The point is, though this idea was stated earlier in the 20th verse of the second chapter, we should remember what has been said in these verses regarding Atman is not at all different from what we are going to discuss or what we are discussing now. And not only that, this repetition of the same word as the sense, as the importance of reminding us of the same truth from different perspectives. Durbodhatva atmavastunaha punar prasangam apadya shabdantarena tadeva vastu nirupayadi bhagavan vasudeva. So the reason is given here, durbodhatvad. So duskarena bodhatvad. Whatever we can understand using our mind or intellect and the five senses of perception becomes obvious at the empirical level, at the level of relativity. But there are certain fundamental truths that we know very well, but every moment when we open our eyes and when we confront the realities of everyday life, we forget that great truth and we are not able to remember what becomes obvious to us when we read a scripture or when we are in a temple or a place of worship. So when we read scriptures, or when we listen to certain great lectures, or when we pray in a place of worship, or when we associate with some holy persons, we are reminded of certain high sublime truths. But after some time, this recognition fades away. We forget that, and we come into compromise with the everyday empirical worldly things. So intellectual understanding and cognition doesn't always help. So Bhashyakara says it is durbodhatvat. It's very difficult to understand. That's why it's mentioned here. Is sakshat aparokshat brahma. Brahmajnanam is not pratyaksha, as empirical worldly things are obvious. Cognition at the empirical level is self-evident, more or less, at the relative level. And things which are far away from us, which are remote, which is called paroksha, also we can try to understand or imagine. But Atmajnanam is aparoksha, is sakshat aparoksha. Atmajnanam is not pratyaksha in the sense that we can understand things at the empirical level. All empirical things can be understood at the pratyaksha level. Atmajnanam, Atman is not remote because it is our own true nature. It is our own true nature. It is not remote. It is not paroksha nor pratyaksha. So it is aparoksha. So how to remember this truth? Through constant repetition. Till we reach the level of spiritual experience, till we really experience this truth, constant repetition, constant reminding ourselves of this spiritual truth is a spiritual sadhana, is a spiritual practice. That's why Vedanta Shastre na punarukti doshaha is a famous statement in the Acharya tradition. Vedanta Shastre na punarukti doshaha. In Vedanta tradition, Moksha Shastras, in all spiritual literature, repetition is not a drawback, it is not a defect, rather it is a necessity for even driving home the fundamental spiritual truths. Tatra yadeva atma vishayam kinjit na uchyade tada edasma slogartha na dirichyade kinjit shabdataka puniruktam kinjit arthadaga idi durbodhatvat atmavastunaha puna puna prasangam apadya shabdantarena tadeva vastu nirupayadi Bhagavan Vasudeva. So again and again the idea is repeated. The Lord Krishna, the Lord of Bhagavad Gita, the great teacher, Bhagavan Vasudeva, he repeats the same idea from different angles, from different perspectives. Katham tu nama samsarinam avyaktam tattvam buddhigocharadam apannam sat samsara nivurtaye syat idi. The reason is this: how to make these spiritual truths obvious and understandable to people living in this world who are samsaris, because they can understand only through intellect. The first step is to read the scriptures, Sravana, and then Sudartha Jnana, Sudartha Mananam, meditating upon the meaning of what we read, what we understand, what we hear from scriptures. So, the first step itself is Sravana. For that we need intellect. So Bhashyakara says this truth, this spiritual truth should be repeated again and again, because it cannot be, it is not realized by, it is not experienced by thought, but thought should be made ready, intellect should be made ready to understand things at the empirical level. And slowly that idea becomes the subject of mananam. So manana takes us to nididhyasana and finally anubhuti. That's why Bhashyakara says, Katham tu nama samsarinam avyaktam tattvam buddhigocharadam apannam tat samsara nivurtaye syat iti. So for that reason itself, it is not to be realized by thought, but that which is of intellectual perception alone can eventually become a subject for mananam or thoughts. Therefore, these ideas should be presented again and again so that we hear these spiritual truths again and again, so that we will be prompted to think and reflect with great concentration and go deeper and deeper into the meaning and essence of what we hear, what we read at the intellectual level, and slowly it takes us to the higher experience level. That's why Vedanta Shastre na Purirukti Doshaka is a fundamental pramana of the Arsha tradition. So we will continue the discussion in the next class. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.